Good evening, everyone. I'm Stephen MacArthur, the director here at the MacArthur Museum of Arkansas Military History, and we're delighted that you have joined us for part one of a two-evening event, evenings with Dr. Curt Fields portraying both General Ulysses S. Grant and President Grant. That will be tomorrow night as President Grant. We're delighted that you joined us. I have the honor of getting through the bookkeeping, the commercial aspects of this. If you would, please silence your phones. We are taping both tonight and tomorrow night, and Lynn is back there. He does a great job for us here at the museum, and I expect within the week he will have both of these presentations ready, fully edited, and we will be posting them on the city's YouTube channel. If you follow us on Facebook, we'll post that when they're ready, and we would encourage you to spread those and to watch them again and again. We get to count those as virtual attendance for the museum, and it's a great way for us to preserve these wonderful presentations and to make them available to people who couldn't be with us here tonight. As you came in the room, you notice on the table there are several flyers of upcoming events at the museum. We would invite you to participate in those if you're able to. You also notice on the table an evaluation. We would love to have your input on the programs that we do here at the museum. You can either take one of those pages and fill it out old school. If you're modern, you can take your iPhone and do the QR code and do it instantaneously. All the surveys are anonymous, and we would, again, value your input. There are restrooms on this floor and the floor below us. If you need those, they're easy to find. Following the presentation tonight by Dr. Fields, we will have a period of question and answer where he will be taking questions as General Grant. Keep that in mind. Address him as General Grant and make the questions pertinent to his time as General Grant. The reason we're able to do events like this is because we have, over the years, developed great relationships with a series of organizations, great partnerships, and one of those is here tonight, represented in this program. Tonight and tomorrow night are brought to you by the museum and the Civil War Roundtable of Arkansas. We have been acquainted with them for many, many years, and this is a significant month for them. It was 62 years ago this month that three icons of Arkansas Civil War history founded the Civil War Roundtable of Arkansas. Many of you remember Jerry Russell, Bill O'Donnell, and Cal Collier. Jerry Russell is well known throughout the state and the nation for his efforts on the preservation of Civil War battle sites. Bill O'Donnell is the author of a book that we actually have in our gift shop, the Civil War Quadrennial. And then Cal Collier has written numerous books about Arkansans and Arkansas regiments in the Civil War. They created this organization during the height of the National Civil War Centennial celebrations. When I was reading that, I happened to remember it wasn't that long ago that we celebrated the 150th anniversary of the Civil War. So that's how long ago that organization was founded and has been in existence actively, continuously since that time, and still meets every month here in Little Rock. The CWRTA developed a driving tour of Central Arkansas Civil War sites. We have that brochure. If you're looking for a great entertainment, diversion, educational experience on the weekend, pick up that brochure downstairs, and you can visit a lot of the local sites that were part of the Little Rock campaign. It's a great way to learn about Civil War history in Arkansas and to visit some actual sites that experienced events during that conflict. One of the objectives of the Civil War Roundtable of Arkansas is to bring to Arkansas outstanding Civil War scholars, often with national reputations, to lecture or present programs on every aspect of the war. And tonight's program, I think, is an excellent example of that commitment. It's my pleasure to introduce their Vice President and Program Coordinator of that organization to welcome you here tonight, and then we'll come back and we'll proceed with the introductions of our guest speaker. Lonnie, please join us.
Thank y'all so much for coming. I represent the Civil War Roundtable of Arkansas. Sure enjoy seeing so many people here to witness a good program. Dr. Fields is excellent. Mr. Ron?
It's now my pleasure to introduce a man that I have known for 25 years. Shortly after I came to the museum in 1999, I think the following year, he joined the advisory board. And since that time, he has been a strong advocate, both financially and through advocacy for the museum. And so, Ron, I know you have some special comments for our speaker tonight. I would let you know that we do have for sale in our bookshop his book, Unconditional Surrender. If you would like to purchase a copy of that, we have about 16 of them still available, and you could go down there. I think he's already autographed just about every one of them, so you'll have an autographed copy by General Ulysses S. Grant. So, Ron, thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for all your support for the museum, and I'll let you introduce our guest speaker tonight.
Well, thanks everybody for being here. It's unique to have this many people in a room all interested in Civil War history. It's really great to have you younger generation here too. There's even Civil War video games out there. So we're really glad to have you. One other person that I'd like to say welcome to here tonight is our director of the State Archives and the Arkansas History Commission, Dr. David Ware, is here with us tonight. So hard-working guy. And if you haven't had the opportunity to go by our state archives, and I just happen to be on the commission, go by the state archives sometimes. A lot of history there, a lot of great displays, and a very willing crowd of people to help you out. Now, there's two things I want to talk about here. Take just a minute. History is so unique. There's the big pictures. There's the Gettysburgs and the General Grants. And then there are little things that crop up from time to time that part of my love for history. As you go back out tonight, you might look at all those postcards that are framed. I know a lot of you went by them. Those postcards were made by Raphael Tuck and Company, which was the printers to the King and Queen of England in the 1890s, 1900s. This company produced a series of Grand Army of the Republic postcards. It just so happened they also produced one card supporting the Southern cause, which was Robert E. Lee on a horse. So those postcards were very unique at the time, and some of them have been saved, so we've got some on display out here for you. Now, the next thing I want to mention, and a lot of people, has anybody here ever heard the General Grant March? Rats. David, you haven't heard it either? Okay. In about 1905, America was beginning to build up. We came off the Spanish-American War very successfully. We were building up patriotism. And a fellow named still don't know his first name, B. Mack, wrote a military march to General Ulysses S. Grant. Now, the reason he wrote this was the clouds were gathering for World War I, and he thought it would be a great additional march to the John Sousa marches that were out there to help build up patriotism. We have secured a rendition of General Grant's march, and we're going to play it. Probably not heard very often here in Arkansas. Thank you very much. Welcome, General Grant. We're glad you're here without firing a shot. We appreciate you and your escort. And at this point in time, I will turn this over to Dr. Curt Fields, who's one of the country's leading portrayers of Ulysses S. Grant. And we appreciate the escort being here this evening. General Grant.
Thank you, gentlemen. You are dismissed. Take your seats. It may be little known to you. It probably is unknown to you. But I am, there's a medical term for it, absolutely tone deaf. All music is noise to me, and I particularly don't like martial music. But having done the career and followed the life I have followed, I have been required to listen to a number of stirring tunes. I know they must be stirring. I see the faces of the people listening to them. But I have not heard the General Grant March. And it is stirring, I have to admit. I enjoyed that. I hope you did too. It gratifies me that you are here. It gratifies me to be asked to come back. I'm not asked to come back in the South to many places. I, however, have been asked, this is my third time to join you good people in Little Rock and the Little Rock Round Table. And I am also very pleased to observe to you that all three times it's been a full house. You gratify me deeply. And your presence here speaks well of you, particularly the young people that I see. It speaks well of you that you are here, that you have come out on the night when you could have stayed home and done myriad other things other than come here and listen to a speaker. But you are to be congratulated, and when you have an opportunity, thank the people who operate this magnificent museum and the people who vote to fund this museum. And when this museum asks you for your dollars, please give them generously. Because as you have enjoyed this night and the past nights, help ensure that there will be other nights for other people to enjoy. Do I make myself clear? Now, I have been asked to speak to you tonight on a topic of my choice, and my choice is when I rescued, some people use the word saved, General Robert E. Lee. And I believe that's a tale that if any of you know anything about it, you don't know much about it. And probably, how many of you know that I personally saved Robert E. Lee from prosecution for treason? I'm impressed. Not many, but I'm impressed. I'm going to tell you tonight how that came to pass. I also have Colonel Spike, who is going to assist me with my time, for I do not wish to wear out my welcome. Mr. Lincoln, as I have told those of you before, you'll hear it again. Mr. Lincoln told me that, General, there's an anatomical feature in every body that if you're going to speak to people, you must be aware of this anatomical feature. There's a nerve that runs from your buttocks to the base of your brain. And when one end gets numb, the other one does too. So I always try to keep that in mind, and I will entertain some questions, should you have any, when I get through talking to you about General Lee. Now, let's go back to April the 9th of 1865. Thank you, First Sergeant, for carrying my portfolio. As I've risen in rank, I have learned generals don't carry things. And then I turned the lieutenant colonel way back, and I realized lieutenant colonels don't carry things if there's a first sergeant. First sergeant, and did well with it, Sergeant. Thank you. You carried it with panache. Thank these men. They are of you. They are among you. They have come tonight dressed to be a part. Please stand, Colonel, Sergeant, stand. These are men who, of their own volition, came to be a part of this to make your night better. So when you have an opportunity, thank them for what they do. They have gone above and beyond. April the 9th of 1865, I met General Robert E. Lee. Now, yes, I had met General Lee on one other occasion. In 1847, when I was a young first lieutenant, just a couple of years out of the academy, and I'd been on a plainclothes civilian attire scouting mission all day, and being a first lieutenant, and I just felt like I had some information that Commanding General Winfield Scott had to have, and he had to have it right then. So I reported immediately to General Scott's tent. Many tents. They didn't call him Old Fuss and Feathers for no reason. He had an extensive headquarters, and General Scott wore everything on his uniform every day that the law allowed that day. He also required that when you come into his presence, you were dressed appropriately, and I went to his headquarters, and I was filthy. I'd been on tree logs. I'd been crawling in the sand and the dirt. I was absolutely filthy, and Captain Robert E. Lee was his essentially chief of staff. He ran the headquarters. And Robert E. Lee, already the great Captain Lee, he was Brevet Colonel Lee, he looked me up and down, and he forevermore chewed me out and said, go back to your quarters and bathe and come back when you are clean and properly dressed as is required by this general. And I slunk off into the night and did it and came back cleaned up in uniform. Well, that was in 1847 in the highlands of northern Mexico. April the 9th of 1865, I had been in pursuit of General Lee. I was with the Army of the Potomac. Now, keep in mind, I was not the commanding officer of the Army of the Potomac. Many people seem to think I was. George Meade was the commanding officer of the Army of the Potomac. I was General-in-Chief of all United States armies, 1 million men. Perhaps you did not know that number. When I took command on I received my commission on March the 9th as Lieutenant General, and on March the 10th, President Lincoln wrote a general order that established me as the General-in-Chief, commanding all United States forces, and there were 1 million United States soldiers. 650,000 under arms, 350,000 at home on leave for various reasons, too many of them for wounds. And I surprised all of them. I think I called everybody back to active duty that could possibly shoulder a musket. And they came pouring back in. But I was in command of 1 million men. And I traveled with the Army of the Potomac. I had my headquarters with the Army of the Potomac. And therefore, we'd been pursuing Lee from April the 2nd of 1865, when Lee evacuated Petersburg, until 7 days later, we caught him at the McLean House in Appomattox Court House. Again, the little things that happen in real life life that you don't know about, that make what happened in real life all the more poignant. I'd been traveling with the Army of the Potomac. Lee had been falling back across Virginia for 100 miles. I hadn't bathed since the night April Fool's Day was the last time I had cleaned myself. In those 7 days, I had not bathed. I had not even changed my clothes. No, not even my underclothing. I'd been in the saddle 12 to 16 hours a day. I was exhausted, my head ringing with nerves. I was absolutely filthy. I stank. My hair was so dirty it looked like it was painted on my head. And as I walked up those 7 steps, there are 13 of them now, but as I walked up those 7 steps into that McLean, onto the porch and into the house, I gave just a fleeting thought, and I looked down and I thought, here I am again, meeting General Lee. And I'm even dirtier than I was the first time. And I had my trousers stuck in my boots. I had a private's blouse, sack coat, no hat cords for rank. I didn't have spurs on. I was absolutely filthy. And I walked in that parlor, that 16 by 16 6-inch parlor. Yes, that's the size. So when you see all those pictures of all those officers in that room, didn't happen. There were only 3 or 4 at a time, and they rotated in and out. But I went in to meet General Lee. We talked, had a little conversation. In fact, he coughed, cleared his throat, and he said, well, we need to be about why we're here, General. And I said, yes, indeed. So we took our seats. I at the small table, he at a larger marble top table, and we talked. We only spent 78 minutes in the room, for those of you who keep track of such matters. And I gave General Lee the terms. Now, I'm not going to read you all of the terms, but they're only 188 words. The terms that I gave Robert E. Lee that essentially ended the war were only 188 words. And his reply to me was only 57 words. Let me see. All right. So what I want to read you is the arms, artillery, and public property to be parked and stacked and turned over to officers appointed by me to receive them. Now that's talking about all the Confederate artillery. Their caissons, the gun carriages. They had taken off and buried a lot of the gun carriages, thinking they might need them later. Some of them, most of them had been spiked, which means in the match hole that fires the cannon, they'd driven a nail or a spike down into the cannon, which renders the cannon useless. But they had wagons, ambulances, supply wagons. And if you ever go to the McLean House at Appomattox, Virginia, and you should if you have that opportunity, when you stand on the McLean House porch and look across the yard, there's a large open field about the size of this area here in front of the museum, to the street out there, just about that size. And I had all the Confederate vehicles parked over there with no guard. Now, some of my staff said to me, General, don't you, such as they would diplomatically approach me, I was approachable. I thought I was approachable. And they said, General, don't you think we need to have a post of guard? And I said, no, you do not. Leave them alone. Park them and leave them. Now, I knew what would happen, and in about 48 hours it happened. Everything in that field was gone. Because you see, the war had been ravaging Virginia for 4 years. And the farmers had nothing. They had nothing And I knew that several hundred, getting into several thousand, wagons and caissons and gun carriages, they've got wheels. And a lot of farmers were going to go in there and get those gun caissons and make carts out of them. They were going to get the ambulances, get the wagons, get anything that would roll and use it on their farms. And that's exactly what I wanted to happen. Somehow that doesn't make it into the history books. But I said more. Now hear me carefully as I read this to you. This will not embrace the sidearms of the officers, nor their private horses or baggage. This done, each officer and man will be allowed to return to their homes, not to be disturbed by the United States authorities so long as they observe their paroles and the laws in force where they may reside. Now, I know you understood that, but I'm going to read it to you again because I want you to not just hear it, listen to what I said to General Lee. Not embrace the sidearms of the officers. What two sidearms does an officer have? A sword and a pistol. No matter where you see an officer on a field of battle, if you see that sword, you know he's an officer. Officers don't carry muskets, they carry pistols. They're this done, and their private horses or their baggage. I let the officers carry their baggage or whatever valises they may have. The infantry had only their clothing and what clothing they had with them. They'll be allowed, each officer and man will be allowed to return to their homes, not a prison camp, their homes. And there were 28,000 Confederates fully expecting to be locked up and sent off into a prison camp, Elmira or Elmira, New York, the federal prison camp for Confederates. They called it Elmira, or down to a place like Andersonville. They were all expecting to go to some hell like that. I told them, go home. If you search your military history, you will not find a civil war fought where the losing side went home. Look, and if you find such, please tell me. Not to be disturbed by United States authority so long as they what? Observe their parole and obey the laws in force where they may reside. Go home. Officers, take your horses. General Lee, during our discussions, I had not put horses in here for the artillery, the cavalry, the quartermaster corps. They had 50, 60,000 animals, and he said, could you put in here that the enlisted men can take their animals, their mules or horses? And I said, no, sir, I will not. He reddened and stiffed, and I thought that I'd offended him, which I did not want to do. But I did not want to put a single word in this document that any lawyer or politician or trading politician would ever argue and say, well, he really meant this. No, sir. You're not going to be able to say that. There's no way to interpret this surrender document except specifically what I put on that paper. And just like there's another document that you're not supposed to change a jot or a tittle except at your peril, I wanted this to be the same. I didn't want anybody to say, well, he really meant. No, sir. So I leaned over to General Lee and I said, it's okay if they take their animals home. All your men have to do is tell my receiving officers, he's my horse. He's my mule, and there will be no challenge. And that's why that's not in here, but that's what happened. Besides that, their horses were all near dead. Rufus Ingalls, my quartermaster, said, "Don't take those horses. We can't feed them." We had about 50,000 of our own animals that we were having to feed forage every day. And if you ever thought about it, if you haven't, think about it now. How much grass do you think 50,000 horses and mules can eat in a day's time around this building? We were having to take our animals miles away for them to graze. So Rufus Ingalls told me, "Liz, don't take those animals. Besides that, they're almost dead on their feet." So it was an act of mercy for them to take their own animals. So I told General Lee, it's early spring. They still got time to get a crop in. He said that will have a very happy effect on my men. I telegraphed later that afternoon to Secretary of War Stanton, "General Robert E. Lee surrendered to me this day. According to my terms, I will forward them tomorrow." And that's all I told the Secretary of War. Now, I will tell you, the next day, on the 10th of April, I went out to see General Lee and tried to get him to order all Confederate soldiers to lay down their arms. He was General-in-Chief. He did have that authority. He demurred and said, "Well, I need to talk to my president before I make that kind of order." And I understood two things. One was that I wasn't going to change Robert E. Lee's mind. And two, if the tables were turned, I too would say, I need to talk to my president before, my General-in-Chief, Commander-in-Chief, before I give such an order. And he said, as I left him, he said, "Well, General, the South is a mighty big place. You may have to march over it 2 or 3 times before you conquer it." And I said, "Hopefully not." So after he surrendered, Stand Watie, or Waddy, some people pronounce it, in Doaksville, Oklahoma Territory, in I think June the 15th, was the last Confederate force in the field to surrender. There was also a Confederate force in Houston, Texas, Sabine River, that surrendered that morning, but that afternoon, Stand Watie surrendered. He was Brigadier General, Cherokee Indian Chief, and he surrendered. So he holds the distinction of being the last Confederate field force to surrender arms. Well, I went back to Washington City. President Lincoln was murdered, and Andrew Johnson took office. Andy Johnson and I got along fine for a while. But he is my president, so that's all I'll say. When you say things, they get back to the people you said them about. I don't know how that happens. Sometimes they wind up in the papers. I wouldn't want one of these Little Rock papers to put on the front page, "General Grant said this about," I'd rather not that happen. But President Johnson took up the reins and immediately ran into loggerheads with Congress. Now, there were really 3 groups in Congress. There were the black Republicans, so the extreme radical Republicans. We call them the black Republicans. And then there are the radical Republicans, and there are the conservatives, which are mainly Democrats, but there are not many of them. And they all have their idea of how to get the country back together. Now, all I'll go into that with you is this. Andy Johnson, who was a strict constitutionalist. Now, either your strict interpretation or loose interpretation. That if the Constitution doesn't say you can't do it, then you can do it. See, that's a loose construction of it. The strict construction of is if the Constitution doesn't say you can do it, you can't do it. And I think we'll probably struggle with that for a long time. I don't know. I'll take a solemn vow with you this night. There are two things I will never do. I will never run for office, and I will never write a book. People always laugh when I say that. But in the end of May, President Johnson issued 14 different exceptions to the amnesty. Now, Andy Johnson was a strict constructionist, and he also, his approach to Reconstruction was twofold. One, he said, and President Lincoln adhered to this too. Andy Johnson and President Lincoln said there's no need to, or they both said they never left the Union. They're just errant sisters who left the Union or feel like they left the Union. No state ever actually left the Union. And President Lincoln wanted to ease people back in, rewrite your state constitutions, and elect a legislature that is pro-union and come back in that way. Andy Johnson wanted all the states in the South to come straight back into the Union with the legislatures essentially that they had. He said, you don't have to have, there's no reconstruction to be had. They never left the country. But then we had amnesty, and there are 14 exceptions. Now, you may be thinking, oh Lord, that man's going to read 2 full pages. No, I won't. There are just a couple I'd like to lift up for you. All who have been military or naval officers of said pretended Confederate government above the rank of colonel in the Army or lieutenant in the Navy. That's all your command staff officers. All who left seats in Congress to aid the rebellion. All who resigned or tendered resignations of their commissions in the Army or of the Navy of the United States to evade duty in resisting the rebellion. All who engaged in any way treating otherwise lawfully prisoners of war, persons found in the United States service as officers, soldiers, seamen. He goes on, for it's exhaustive. But you could get amnesty if you made special application to the president for pardon. See, Andy grew up poor, Greenville, Tennessee. Very, very intelligent man. He gets a bad deal in the history books. Very intelligent man. Couldn't get along with anybody. And he wanted, his approach to Reconstruction was to do away with the aristocratic South leadership, the wealthy leadership, and have the common man step up and take leadership. He absolutely hated wealthy people. But he wanted to come straight back in the Union. He also wanted all these thousands of people to personally come to him and do this and ask for amnesty. That lasted 2 or 3 weeks. When the lines outside the executive residence went around the executive residence multiple times, and he spent several days signing pardons, he quickly realized, I don't need to do this. And he loosened it up and made it a little easier. But Robert E. Lee is one of those people, all persons who at the time when they seek to obtain benefits of the oath are in military, naval, civil confinement, custody, naval, military authorities, agency, U.S. prisoners of war, and on. Well, Lee fit under about 5 or 6 of these 14 exceptions. And he was going to apply for his amnesty. Now, you might think, Lee apply for amnesty. Why? Because Robert E. Lee knew that what he did where he went, the South would go. In fact, there's one officer, his father, I think it was North Carolina, one of the southern states. His father was governor, and the son had applied for amnesty. The father said, he said several things I can't repeat, but essentially, why did you do that? He forevermore tore his son up one side and down the other, epaulette to epaulette. Why did you apply for amnesty? And when the son was finally able to step back from the flames and the fury, and father took a breath, he said, well, because General Lee did. Father immediately changes 180 degrees. He said, well, then it's okay. If General Lee did it, it's okay. And Robert E. Lee knew that. So he applied for amnesty. And I want to read you what he wrote to me on June the 13th of 1865. Now, we signed the surrender April the 9th. President Lincoln endorsed it, the cabinet endorsed it, Congress endorsed all the surrender terms that I gave General Lee. But now Lincoln's dead. And some people who are not in favor of treating the South well, Johnson saying treason must be made odious. The traitor must suffer. My feeling was that that could not be more wrong. You don't heal an incision by ripping out stitches. Not only does it hurt, it aggravates the wound and it keeps it from healing. Treason does not need to be made odious. They are our countrymen again. Welcome them back in, and let's work through a very difficult rejoining of our country. Andy Johnson didn't see it that way. So I get a letter from General Lee. One of my staff comes in. I was working in my office there in the War Department in Washington City, and my staff member said, General, I've got something that you need to see immediately. He gives me this. Now, General Lee wrote, upon reading the President's proclamation of the 29th Ultimo last month, Ultimo's last month, Instant is this month, Proximo is next month. I know you people use those in the letters that you write. But I came to Richmond. Now, that was the 14 exceptions that General Lee's referring to. And General Lee wrote to me, I came to Richmond to ascertain what was proper or required of me to do when I learned that, with others, Jubal Early and James Longstreet, I was to be indicted for treason by the grand jury at Norfolk. Now, it looks like Norfolk. But if you say Norfolk, they're going to say, you're not from around here, are you? It's Norfolk. I had my suspenders popped a time or two about that too, so passing it on. At the grand jury at Norfolk, I had supposed that the officers and men of the Army of Northern Virginia were, by the terms of their surrender, I emphasize those with you, protected by the U.S. government from molestation so long as they conform to its conditions. Go home, don't take up arms again, obey the law. I am ready. Now you can hear Robert E. Lee saying this. I am ready to meet any charges that may be preferred against me and do not wish to avoid trial. But if I am correct as to the protection granted by my parole and am not to be prosecuted, I desire to comply with the provisions of the President's proclamation and therefore enclose the required application which I request in that event may be acted on. Well, you see, this was the first I'd heard of that. And I inquired about that and found out that President Johnson had charged James Speed You all know James Speed, he's the Attorney General. To go, now he selected a court. I certainly hope that doesn't happen in the future. But he selected a court with a judge he knew would be sympathetic to his cause. And I certainly hope that never happens again. But he went down to Judge John C. Underwood, who was the federal judge to the District Court of Southern Virginia. And Attorney General Speed told Judge Underwood, it's the wish of the President of the United States that you convene a federal grand jury to consider charging Robert E. Lee for treason. By the time the process was instituted, it was Robert E. Lee, James Longstreet, Jubal Early, et al. And et al. Is lawyer talk for and others. Now, all of you know that those and others, once that party was started, that ball was put in motion. There would have been no stopping until every Confederate officer down to the last junior second lieutenant had been arrested. And it would have been a situation where, well, all right, Robert E. Lee, we're going to give you a fair trial and then we're going to hang you with all the proper decorum that you deserve. I was absolutely livid. I was beyond speaking when I found this. I did not trust myself to go to the president at that time because I was so angry. Then I became, even though I thought that was not possible, I became angrier because I got this that I'm going to share with you. This was the charge to a federal grand jury by a sitting federal judge who has convened a grand jury to consider charging Robert E. Lee with treason, a matter that could start the War of the Rebellion all over again, yet the judge says this to the jury. To an inquiry which has been made by an officer of the court, whether the terms of parole, those 188 words that I gave General Lee, whether the terms of parole agreed upon with General Lee were any protection to those taking the parole. Somebody said in that court process, but Judge Underwood, what about the surrender terms that General Lee received from General Grant that he accepted? So Judge Underwood, in his infinite wisdom, says, the answer is that was a mere military arrangement. And can have no influence upon civil rights or the status of the persons interested. I should like to read that to you again to let it soak in. To an inquiry which has been made by an officer of the court whether the terms of parole agreed upon with General Lee were any protection to those taking the parole, the answer is that was a mere military arrangement and can have no influence upon civil rights or the status of the persons interested. There were 750,000 men who served in the Confederate States Army. Of that 750,000, about 200,000 were killed in action. Another couple of 100,000 were wounded and permanently injured. They are the ones interested in that mere military arrangement and whether or not they'd have protection under that arrangement. I could not speak. I was so furious. After I got myself together and calmed down a bit to go address the President of the United States, I went to the executive residence and I approached the President and I said, "What is this?" Now, he had known I knew about it because I had taken these steps that I now must needs tell you. On June the 13th, when I got the letter from General Lee, I forwarded that on June 16th to the Secretary of War, Secretary Stanton, who is my superior officer, immediate superior officer. And I wrote on the back of General Lee's letter, respectfully forwarded through the Secretary of War to His Excellency the President, with the earnest recommendation that this application of General R. E. Lee for amnesty and pardon may be granted him.
Pardon me, General, but our time is going near.
Thank you, Colonel. It's good to have good staff. It's also good for you to know that I'm right on time. The oath of allegiance required by the recent order of the President to accompany applications does not accompany this for the reason, as I'm informed by General Ord, EOC Ord, Edward Otha Cresap Ord, the Christian general. He'd lost his right arm above the elbow at the Battle of Seven Pines back in '62, kept on fighting for the Union, was running the Freedmen's Bureau there at the end of the war, was a minister of the gospel, and was known as the Christian general. Good man. And I had put General Ord in command of the occupation of Richmond. The order had not reached Richmond. There was another addendum that General Lee didn't have with his letter to me that just wasn't required at the time. Secretary of War Stanton wrote on the back of this letter's cabinet meeting document presented by the Secretary of War and postponed for consideration in cabinet. Now, Stanton is a very intelligent man. Perhaps you did not know he's a brilliant attorney. He ain't much to look at, but he's a brilliant attorney. Pretty prickly fellow, too. Hard to get along with, but a brilliant attorney. He's the one that developed this new thing in law, the insanity plea. Because Dan, I can't think of his name now, who? No, not Butterfield. He's supposed to have written Taps, and he didn't. But Francis Scott Key's grandson was having an affair with this fellow's wife, and the general found out about it and shot him dead on the street in Washington. Murdered him midday, shot him dead for trifling with his wife. He got Edwin Stanton for his attorney, and Edwin Stanton developed the insanity plea, temporary insanity, and got him off. He served in the war, wounded at Gettysburg, lost his leg at Gettysburg. Who was that? Sickles, Dan Sickles. I had the first name right. But Sickles murdered Francis Scott Key's grandson on the streets of Washington and walked away from it on an temporary insanity plea. That's Edwin Stanton. Pretty sharp fellow. So he got that, and he said, we don't need to handle this, because now some folks will tell you that Jefferson Davis, he was locked up for 2 years at Fortress Monroe, and then Horace Greeley paid most of his bail to get him out, and Stanton supported Jefferson Davis being paroled. Now, it's darkly said that, and I have no opinion on this, nor will I state one, but it's darkly said that Jeff Davis was released without being taken to trial for treason because there was great concern that it just might be discovered in a court of law that secession was not illegal. It just might be found in a court of law that the reason that Lincoln went to war against the South was not a legal reason, that secession, see, there's nothing in the Constitution that says a state cannot secede. There's no language that addresses that. There is the elastic clause that said those powers not granted to the federal government are reserved to the states. The elastic clause. So, and I have no opinion on that. I just want you to know that the contemporary thinking is, Stanton was saying, don't go into a courtroom and open that Pandora's box, because we just may not be able to get the lid back on it. Well, Stanton was of the same frame of mind, I believe, that with Lee sending in this application for amnesty and my endorsement, Stanton is thinking, we don't need to put this on the docket right now. Let's see what happens with this. Any good lawyer will tell you, time's your best friend. Whether he's defending you or prosecuting you, they'll tell you, and they're right, time's your best friend. So Stanton wanted to keep the lid on that Pandora's box, particularly with me supporting it. Well, I went to see the president, and I said, I have never uttered an oath or a swear word in my life, nor will I ever. I don't have to. I've got Sherman and John Rawlins for that. But I have never cursed or sworn in my life. Never. Never. And I won't permit it in my presence, except Sherman and Rawlins. Nor will I permit off-color stories or jokes. I will not permit it in my presence. One of my officers in a staff meeting said, he looks around, he said, well, there's no ladies present. I'm going to tell this story. And I said, but there are gentlemen present. And I think he took the hint from his commanding officer. He didn't need to tell the story. He didn't. But I went into the president's office, and essentially this is what transpired. I said, what are you doing? What are you thinking? He said, well, I'm going to try Robert E. Lee and James Longstreet and Jubal Early. Now, you may wonder why Longstreet and Early, or maybe Early. You know, Longstreet was Lee's old warhorse, his right arm. And he's also one of my best friends, and has been since 1840. But Longstreet was he sitteth at the right hand of Robert E. Lee. All the time Robert E. Lee was in command. Jubal Early, you might think, why Jubal? Lee called him my bad old man. Well, if you remember, just a few months before the surrender, Early led a raid up the Shenandoah. And they looted and burned and destroyed. I don't recall the name of the town, but Early held the town ransom. And he demanded, I think, $50,000, $100,000 in gold. I was busy at Petersburg. And the town said, no, we're not going to do that. He burned it down. He said, I'm going to burn down your town if you don't pay the ransom. They said, we're not going to pay the ransom. He put it to the torch. He said, see, I told you. I wasn't fooling. I wasn't kidding. I'm going to burn your town down. So that was recent in the memory, apparently, of His Honor, Judge Underwood. And they charged Jubal Early. And I said, you can't do this. Actually, I raised my voice and heatedly said, you can't do this. I said, you must not do this. Actually, I said, you will not do this. And Johnson sat there like a frog on a log, blinking his eyes at me, and he said, what do you mean? And I said, you cannot charge Robert E. Lee with treason. Now, I gave him that surrender document, that 188 words. I gave him those surrender terms. And the president accepted it, the cabinet accepted it, Congress accepted it, everybody accepted it. Those 28,000 Confederate soldiers that were still at Appomattox, they all went home. Nobody went to a prison camp. I gave him my word as a soldier. If you will lay down your arms, surrender, go home, and mind your business, you're not going to be in jeopardy from the United States government. I said, do you not understand that, Mr. President? And this business is bunkum of it's a mere military agreement. That's an outrage. General Lee, had he thought that he was going to be hanged for treason, would never have surrendered the Army of Northern Virginia, and those 28,000 men there at Appomattox would never have surrendered. They'd have fought to the last man standing there between the Army of the Potomac on one side and the Army of the James on the other. Those men at that town were the stalwarts of the Confederacy. They had not deserted. They had not quit. They knew the cause was lost, and they were still standing there and saying, Yank, come on, because we got plenty for you. Come ahead. And what you're about to do, Mr. President, is start the war again. There are already newspapers across the South saying if the Northerners are disregarding their side of the agreement, then maybe that negates our side of the agreement. You're about to light a fuse that's going to explode and put this country back at war, and it's going to be a guerrilla warfare, shooting from doors and alleys and windows, ambushes. There'll be no end to the blood. Jeff Davis wanted the guerrilla war, and Robert E. Lee turned him down. He said, these men will have no supervision. They will be bloody. They will have no control. That's why I let them keep their sidearms. Number one, their swords. I knew there was going to be swords hanging over thousands of mantles all over the South. That was all right. Let them have their pride. Not one Confederate officer, not one, had to bend his knee and give his sword to the commanding, conquering Yankee. Not one had his sword broken over a Yankee's knee. Take your sword home and hang it over that mantle and say, yes, I fought for what I believed in. And the pistols, those 28,000 soldiers I'm talking about, they're not all kindly men. And men who have no supervision sometimes do not have your best interests at heart. And they needed somebody they knew was in authority over them, and that somebody had a pistol to back up his authority. I was excoriated and criticized and condemned all over the northern press. You let a bunch of rebs loose in the countryside with guns. What are you thinking? And that didn't bother me a whit, because I said they are honorable men. If they say they're not fighting anymore, they're not going to fight anymore. But I need somebody that's got some authority and some control on those soldiers as they are going home. And you, Mr. President, are about to light this keg and explode this country again into war. And you must not do this. And he said, well, when can I charge Lee? And I said, never. You can never charge Robert E. Lee for treason, nor anybody else. Do you not hear what I am saying to you? Well, I want to charge him. And I said, if you persist in this madness, if you persist in trying Robert E. Lee for treason, I am going to resign my commission and rank as Lieutenant General in the United States Army right here and put it on your desk. I'm done with this. I'm resigning and leaving the Army. Well, he stopped blinking with that one. I thought he was going to have apoplexy. And he muttered, well, all right. And I said, you will not prosecute General Lee nor anyone else in the Confederate States Army. If you do, I will be here in your office forthwith with my written resignation from the United States Army. Do I make myself clear? And all he would do, yeah. He's not so articulate when he's angry. And I left his office. And I thought that was the last of it. Now, there is a bit more. On June the 20th, General Lee, let me see here. General Lee wrote me a letter. He had been told, forward your reply for amnesty. But he said, or I wrote this to General Lee, your communication of the date 13 instant, his telling me I've been charged. What do you know about this? Stating the steps you've taken after reading the President's proclamation of the 29th ultimo last month, instant this month, proximo next month. Now see, the next time you write a letter, I want all of you to use that. When you learned that with others you were to be indicted for treason by the grand jury at Norfolk, you had supposed the officers and men of the Army of Northern Virginia were, by the terms of their surrender, the judge said that mere military agreement, by the terms of the surrender, protected by the U.S. government from molestation so long as they conformed to its conditions, that you were ready to meet any charges that might be preferred against you and did not wish to avoid trial. That is, to me, that's one of the instances of the ultimate of courage. Robert Lee stood up and said, I'm not afraid to stand trial. Do what you will, but leave my men alone. But that if you were correct as to the protection granted by your parole and were not to be prosecuted, you desired to avail yourself of the President's amnesty proclamation. Yes, now, General Lee did apply for amnesty. There were those who said, no, Robert E. Lee never did that. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. I was involved in it. I'm here to tell you. So, and in closing, an application, therefore, with a request that in the event it is acted on has been received and forwarded to the Secretary of War with the following opinion endorsed by me. Now, I wrote this to General Lee, and I'd written it on his application for amnesty. In my opinion, the officers and men paroled at Appomattox Court House and since, upon the same terms given to General Lee, cannot be tried for treason so long as they observe the terms of their parole. And this is my understanding. Good faith as well as true policy dictates that we should observe the conditions of that convention. Bad faith on the part of the government or a construction of subjecting the officers to trial for treason would produce a feeling of insecurity in the minds of all the paroled officers and men. About 500,000 of them who were already angry. If so disposed, they might even regard such an infraction of terms by the government as an entire release from all obligations on their part. I will state further that the terms granted by me met with the hearty approval of the President at the time and of the country generally. The action of Judge Underwood in Norfolk has already had an injurious effect. And I would ask that he be ordered to quash all the indictments found against paroled prisoners of war and to desist from the further prosecution of them. This opinion, I am informed, is substantially the same as that entertained by the government. I have forwarded your application for amnesty and pardon to the President with the following endorsement and respectfully forwarded, and I've already read you what he had sent me. Now, as I said, I thought that was the end of it, but I must needs go forward in time and slip time a bit. Between June the 16th and June the 20th, I met with President Johnson, and he agreed to drop the matter. On June 20th, Attorney General Speed instructed the U.S. District Attorney in Norfolk not to arrest any paroled officers or soldiers. On December the 25th of 1868, now this all happened in June of 65. On December the 25th of 1868, 2.5 years later, President Johnson issued a general amnesty proclamation that covered General Lee, who was barred, however, from holding state or federal office under the 14th Amendment. There are some clauses in the 14th. Now, see, the 14th Amendment made all former slaves citizens. Didn't give Indian citizenship because there's a clause in there, about 5 words it says in, I think, Clause 4, citizenship to all those under the protection of the United States government. Native Americans were under tribal government. Therefore, with those 5 words, 5 or 6, the 14th Amendment did not give Native Americans citizenship. I'll slip time again. Anybody know when Native Americans actually became United States citizens? 1921. The Snyder Act. But I digress. The indictment of General Lee was not formally dropped until February the 15th of 1869. Now this happened between June 13th and 16th of 1865. That indictment was not dropped until February of 1869, 4 years later. Now, I will tell you the significance of that because I had to slip time. February the 15th of 1869, the indictment was finally officially dropped. March the 4th of 1869, 3 weeks later, I took office as the 18th president. So that, my friends, is the tale of how I kept Robert E. Lee from being tried for treason. And I really do not think General Lee ever knew it. I certainly never told him. Nobody that I know ever told him that I had done that. But I put my career on the desk of the President of the United States if he did not stop the prosecution of Lee as a traitor. Thank you. Colonel and the sergeant, first sergeant.